Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the US to send Ukraine depleted uranium ammunition. So the Biden administration is expected to provide Ukraine with controversial depleted uranium ammunition for use with the US made Abrams tanks. And this is according to US officials speaking to the Wall Street Journal. So, depleted uranium, it's a byproduct of enriched uranium. It's extremely dense, which makes it a good material for penetrating armor. But depleted uranium is radioactive and it's been linked to cancer, birth defects, and environmental damage in areas where it's been used, especially Iraq. The U.S. has used a lot of depleted uranium in the Gulf War and during the invasion. And the impact of this is still being felt today. I know in Fallujah there's still babies, lots of birth defects. Babies are born and then because they're have so many issues, they die pretty much immediately. And Fallujah was subject to several sieges during the war. And I know the U.S. used depleted uranium there and also white phosphorus, so all sorts of chemicals that they used on that city. But it is a lasting impact. It really poisons the land, and this is now what the U.S. is going to arm Ukraine with. And according to the Wall Street Journal report, there was a debate within the White House over whether or not to provide Ukraine with these depleted rounds because some officials raised concerns about the idea that they could cause health and environmental damage. Well, actually, the way the report worded it is that they said they were concerned that the U.S. might be criticized for providing a weapon that could cause those things, more concerned about their reputation than actually, giving people cancer and things like that. So the report said that the Pentagon has been pushing for the U.S. to arm the Abrams tanks that it sends to Ukraine with depleted uranium. And under the current plan right now, the U.S. is refurbishing old Abrams tanks that are expected to arrive in Ukraine by the fall. And U.S. made Bradley fighting vehicles can also be armed with depleted uranium. That's why they're known as the tank killer. So the U.S. has sent Bradley fighting vehicles, and we actually don't know if they're armed with depleted uranium or not. The White House refused to say when they were asked earlier this year when the U.S. first started sending the Bradleys if they would be armed with depleted uranium. I haven't seen any reports that said they were, but again, we don't really know. So the British were the first to openly send depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine for the British-made Challenger 2 tank. And the British took that step despite Russia warning that it would treat Ukraine's use of the radioactive ammunition the same as a dirty bomb. And then Putin said that his decision to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus was a response to the UK arming Ukraine with depleted uranium. So you see how Russia reacted to the British doing it. Who knows how they're going to react to the US sending these types of weapons over there. All right, the next one here. The U.S. announces $325 million arms package for Ukraine. So the Biden administration announced this on Tuesday, and it includes Bradley and Stryker armored vehicles and ammunition for various weapon systems. So U.S. officials told Voice of America that the administration was planning to send more Bradley and Stryker armored vehicles to replace the ones that have been damaged or destroyed during Ukraine's counteroffensive operations. So CNN reported on Monday that according to open source intelligence, Ukraine has lost at least 16 US made Bradley fighting vehicles in the past several days. Russia has said that it captured several Bradleys and German made Leopard tanks. So it looks like that's what they're trying to do here is replace these vehicles that are already being destroyed in the counteroffensive. And this new $325 million weapons package is being provided through the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the U.S. to send arms directly from U.S. military stockpiles. The funds are being drawn from spending that has already been authorized for the war, which at this point totals $113 billion. So, according to the Pentagon, the arms in this package include munitions for the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, Stinger and anti-aircraft systems, additional ammunition for the HIMARS rocket systems, 105 and 155 millimeter artillery rounds. Then you got the Bradleys and the Strikers, Javelin anti-tank systems, TOW missiles, AT-4 anti-armor systems, over 22 million rounds of small arms ammunition and grenades, demolition munitions for obstacle clearing, tactical secure communication support equipment, spare parts, and other field equipment. So, according to the Pentagon, this new weapons package brings the total amount of U.S. military equipment that's been pledged for Ukraine since Russia's invasion last year to over $40 billion. And that's just in weapons alone. And that's also just what they're telling us. They could be providing military aid through other means that we're not aware of. All right, so the next one here, Germany says that it cannot replace all the Leopard tanks that it provided to Ukraine. So Germany's defense minister, Boris Pistorius, said on Monday that Berlin will not be able to replace every German-made Leopard tank that Ukrainian forces lose in their fight against Russia. So his comments came amid reports that Leopards have been destroyed in Ukraine's counteroffensive. And again, Russia said that it captured some of these German-made tanks. So the German defense minister refused to authenticate images circulating online that show damaged Leopard tanks in Ukraine. There's been a lot of pictures like that going around on social media, but appearing to confirm that Ukraine is losing a lot of armored vehicles. Andriy Melnik, who's Ukraine's deputy foreign minister, is asking for more Western armor, including the Leopard 2 tank. So Melnik said, quote, "The Ukrainian army desperately needs many more Western battle tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and other armored vehicles. Each Leopard 2 is literally worth its weight in gold for a decisive offensive," end quote. So Germany has provided Ukraine with 18 Leopard 2 tanks from its military stockpiles and is also sending refurbished Leopard 1 tanks. But Melnik thinks that Berlin could do more, saying that the supply of Leopard 2 tanks from Germany could be tripled without jeopardizing Germany's ability to defend itself. Pistorius said that Germany will not be able to replace every tank that is now out of action, and he added that it is the nature of war that weapons are destroyed and tanks are destroyed and people are killed. So I'm not sure exactly how many of these Leopard 2 tanks Ukraine has received. I know they were getting some from other countries, from Poland as well. But I know that Germany, kind of had trouble getting a lot of them together to send over there. And that's part of the reason why they're refurbishing the older Leopard ones to send to Ukraine. And, when it comes to the counteroffensive, there's still been a lot of fighting on Tuesday. Ukraine's claimed they took some villages. Russia said they took some back, and that Ukraine's taking very heavy losses. But I'm not going to do an update every day on like the battle lines, just because it is changing so much. But I figure, as things develop more, when there's bigger changes, then I'll probably cover that. But the fighting is still ongoing. It seems pretty heavy, just so you guys are aware. The next one here, the U.S. did not properly track arms for Ukraine. And this article is from Kyle Anzalone over at the Libertarian Institute. This is based on a report put out by the Pentagon. So a report from the Department of Defense Inspector General found that Pentagon employees in Poland failed to follow procedures to account for military equipment being transferred to Ukraine. In the shipments of weapons monitored by the office, Pentagon employees failed to properly track the weapons in 3 of 5 shipments. So the report said, quote, "DoD personnel did not have the required accountability of the thousands of defense items that they received and transferred in Poland. We observed that DoD personnel did not fully implement their standard operating procedures to account for defense items and could not confirm the quantities of defense items received against the quantity of items shipped for 3 of 5 shipments we observed." End quote. So I guess this is talking about, a place in Poland where the weapons come in from the U.S. and then from there they get shipped over to Ukraine. And apparently, these Pentagon personnel that are doing this were not, doing everything properly. And this is just on that end, on the U.S. end. Who knows what happens when it gets into Ukraine? But I thought this was interesting, and Kyle found this report. I didn't really see this covered anywhere. He just links to this thing that was released by the Pentagon. So one example in the Inspector General report explains how weapons are shipped without a manifest. So the report said that one shipment containing thousands of small arms and night vision optic devices and various types of cold weather gear did not include an air manifest. DoD personnel opened crates to identify the types of defense items contained within the crates, but even then the personnel could not verify whether the number of items they identified represented the true number shipped. So there's some mix-up over, how many of these weapons they're actually sending. And he mentions that John Sobko, who is the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, some members of Congress want to put him in charge of overseeing Ukraine aid. He's been saying that there's going to be, weapons are going to end up on the black market. There's going to be waste. This is all inevitable, even though, you have all these people in the Biden administration, in Congress, claiming that, no, we don't have to worry about waste. We don't have to worry about weapons ending up on the black market. Just keep, shipping them in there. All right, the next one here. Congress wants to punish South Africa for its relationship with Russia. So a bipartisan group of 4 members of Congress is asking the Biden administration to punish South Africa over its relationship with Russia. So South Africa's neutral stance on the war in Ukraine and its continued ties with Russia have angered the U.S. The African nation has been accused of loading a Russian ship with military equipment that docked at a naval base near Cape Town in December 2022. But the U.S. has offered no evidence to back up the claim. The U.S. ambassador to South Africa made the accusation publicly, kind of, showing what kind of diplomats we have in the U.S. So in a letter to President Biden's top aides, lawmakers claimed that intelligence suggests that the South African government used the opportunity when the Russian ship docked there to covertly supply Russia with arms and ammunitions. They also listed examples of other actions by South Africa that the U.S. is not happy about, including joint military exercises with Russia and China, allowing a Russian plane to land at a South African military base. And they're also hosting an upcoming BRICS summit, and they're looking to accommodate Putin. They might actually move the summit because they don't want to have to worry about arresting, somebody trying to arrest Putin under that arrest warrant that was issued by the ICC. So this letter, they said that they want Biden to take action against South Africa's participation in a Forum for the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is a law that provides duty-free access to markets in the U.S. for dozens of African nations. South Africa is set to host the forum for this law this year, which is really like a trade forum. But these members of Congress want that to change. They said, quote, "We are seriously concerned that hosting the 2023 AGOA Forum in South Africa would serve as an implicit endorsement of South Africa's damaging support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine and possible violation of U.S. sanctions law," end quote. So they're accusing South Africa of supporting Russia's invasion, based on no evidence. It just goes to show that how they view, neutrality, or a country just not severing ties with Russia, not going along with the sanctions. That just automatically means that they're supporting the war. And this letter was signed by Senators Chris Coons, James Reich, and then the top Republican and Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which is Michael McCaul. He's a Republican, and Gregory Meeks. All right. So the next one here. According to multiple media reports, the CIA told Ukraine not to bomb the Nord Stream pipelines. So on Tuesday, there was several reports in a few different Western media outlets that said the CIA warned Ukraine last year not to bomb the Nord Stream natural gas pipelines that connect Russia and Germany. So in recent months, U.S. and other Western officials speaking to the media have suggested that Ukraine was behind the Nord Stream sabotage. Most of these reports have ignored or dismissed, Seymour Hersh's reporting that says President Biden ordered the bombing of the pipelines. So, according to unnamed U.S. officials speaking to the New York Times, Dutch intelligence officials told the CIA in June 2022 that they learned of a Ukrainian military plot to attack the pipelines. The CIA then warned Ukraine not to carry out the attack, and U.S. officials now believe that it was postponed to September 2022. That's when the explosions happened. So, this is similar to something I covered recently that the Washington Post reported, citing the Discord leaks, although they didn't publish the document. They said that an unnamed European country's intelligence agency tipped off the U.S. to some plot by Ukraine, and this is saying it was the Dutch. So, a European official told the New York Times that Ukraine's original plan involved Ukrainian special forces renting a submersible vessel to attack the pipelines. And the CIA was also said to warn Germany about a potential plot to sabotage Nord Stream. So, these latest allegations were first reported in German and Dutch media, and they claimed that the Ukrainian plot was overseen by Valery Zaluzhny, who is the commander in chief of Ukraine's armed forces. Again, they're not acting like this was rogue Ukrainian operatives. They're tying it directly to Ukrainian leadership, to Ukraine's military leadership. And for his part, Zelensky has denied that Kiev was involved in the destruction of the pipelines. So the idea that the U.S. suspected Ukrainian involvement in the Nord Stream bombings first surfaced in a New York Times report that was published on March 7th. So Seymour Hersh says he has sources that told him that story was a cover-up planted in the paper by the CIA to discredit his story that points the finger at President Biden. So since then, since Hersh's report, I believe was published in February, the first one that said, it was titled "How America Took Out the Nord Stream Pipelines." It hasn't been confirmed anywhere else, really. But I believe that the U.S. is still, a major suspect, as it had the clear motive. And U.S. officials made threats against the pipelines before, specifically President Biden and Victoria Nuland made very similar threats in January and February 2022. Before Russia invaded, they both said if Russia invades, there's not going to be a Nord Stream 2 pipeline anymore. They said it in their own way. Biden vowed to bring an end to the pipeline. Victoria Nuland said one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward. Threatening words. We don't, who knows if we're ever going to really know the full story here. But I do think it's interesting that now, the official story coming from the U.S. basically, even though this is just anonymous officials talking, but the story is now that it was Ukraine. It seems like they're pinning it directly on Ukrainian leadership, which is interesting. And if you remember when it first happened, the media and a lot of members of Congress and European officials blamed Russia right away, even though that was ridiculous. So we always have to keep that in mind, especially when we're talking about who blew up the dam. So it's just interesting that this is the story now. The official line that we're getting from the New York Times and other mainstream media is that it was probably Ukraine. All right. So the next one here, NATO says that Russia must lose because of China. So NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg met with President Biden in Washington on Tuesday and said that Russia must lose in Ukraine to send a message to China, as the Western alliance increasingly has its eyes on the Asia Pacific. So I thought this quote was interesting. Stoltenberg said this with President Biden at the White House. He said, quote, "President Putin must not win this war because that will not only be a tragedy for Ukrainians, but also make the world more dangerous. It will send a message to authoritarian leaders all over the world, also in China, that when they use military force, they get what they want, and we will then become more vulnerable. So it's our security interest to support Ukraine," end quote. So I know that that's been part of the talking point, that Russia can't win or else other countries will use force. But, in this here, he's specifically mentioning China. Maybe he said something like this before and I missed it, but I just thought it was notable that he's saying, the head of NATO is saying this. Russia must lose because of China is basically what he's saying. And his comments come as NATO is planning to boost ties with countries in the Asia Pacific. There was a report from Nikkei Asia on Tuesday that said NATO is preparing documents to increase relations with its four main partners in Asia, which include Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. they're going to form what they call individually tailored partnership programs for each of these nations. They will outline a roadmap for collaboration. NATO is also looking to open a liaison office in Japan, but that idea is facing resistance from France. And Macron has this crazy idea that the North Atlantic Alliance should stay in the North Atlantic, and he's warning against expanding into Asia. All right. The next one here is another one from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The U.S. Coast Guard to expand operations in waters claimed by China. So that's right. The U.S. Coast Guard is going to be sailing more around China's coast. So the head of the U.S. Coast Guard said that its ships will conduct more activities in the Indo-Pacific to contest China's territorial claims. The branch will attempt to increase its joint operations with other nations in the region as well. So this is from Admiral Linda Fagan, the commandant of the Coast Guard. She told Nikkei Asia on Monday, quote, "The Indo-Pacific is clearly a consequential region for America's future. The United States Indo-Pacific strategy identifies an expanded role for the Coast Guard as a top administration priority as we seek to ensure a region that is free and open," end quote. So she's saying there's going to be additional Coast Guard cutter patrols and they're going to deploy specialized forces. I'm not sure what that means for the Coast Guard, but, this is all part of the plan. And I know that specifically the U.S. Coast Guard is looking to start doing joint patrols with the Philippines. And that's very dangerous because the Philippines has a lot of encounters with Chinese vessels in the South China Sea. So it's just going to put, we've been talking a lot about these encounters between the U.S. and Chinese militaries. And all this is just going to create more of them, and it's going to increase the risk of an accident. And, I wouldn't be surprised, we shouldn't be surprised if one day you wake up and you see in the news that, a Chinese or American plane collided or ships collided or they shot at one another or something like that happened. And all of a sudden the U.S. and China are at the brink of war. I think that's actually very possible. I don't think the U.S. plans are to go to war with China right now. It's not a near-term war that they're preparing for, but an accident could happen really at any time. All right. The next one here, 22 U.S. troops injured in a Syria helicopter mishap. So U.S. Central Command announced in a press release on Monday night that 22 U.S. troops were injured in a helicopter mishap in northeastern Syria. The command said that the incident happened on Sunday and resulted in injuries of various degrees. The press release said that 10 service members were evacuated to higher care facilities. So CENTCOM shared little detail about the mishap. They said it was still under investigation and that no enemy fire was reported. It's not clear where exactly in northeast Syria that this incident took place. So they said this happened on Sunday, and there were reports of a U.S. helicopter raid that same day. A U.S. airdrop operation involving helicopters was reported in al-Hasaka, which is a province in northeastern Syria. According to Syrian state media, the operation was carried out with the Kurdish-led SDF, and they said one civilian was killed by U.S. forces. There was another report from the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. They are, very pro-opposition. They also reported a helicopter raid in the same area, but they claimed that a person affiliated with ISIS was killed in a joint U.S. SDF operation. So neither account has been confirmed, and CENTCOM has not mentioned the operation. And just from my experience with Syrian state media, their news agency, SANA, I follow them a lot for airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes in Syria, and they don't tend to exaggerate or make up, things about civilian casualties. So I would lean more toward their account being true. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, sometimes they're the only source on anything, but they change their story a lot. And, a lot of media outlets rely on them and will use their numbers. And then if you go back and actually look at their website, they've changed their report. So it's always something. I kind of check their website to kind of try to confirm things, but it seems like they're always changing their story. So the U.S. has about 900 troops in eastern Syria and backs the SDF in the region, allowing Washington to control about 1/3 of the country's territory. The U.S. claims the occupation is about fighting ISIS, but as we know, This is part of the economic campaign against Syria, which involves crippling economic sanctions and controlling the country's oil fields. The last one here is another one from Kyle Anzalone. He's been very prolific lately. U.S. intelligence is buying swaths of commercial data, and this is another article at the Libertarian Institute. So, according to a report released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the U.S. intelligence agencies are purchasing massive amounts of commercially available information that can reveal sensitive and intimate information about individuals. So this data is available for purchase, often to non-government entities. I guess this is kind of what these tech companies are always collecting from us when we're on our phones and on the internet and social media and stuff. So the data it's usually possible to identify individuals, including U.S. persons, based on this data. And this type of data poses a significant risk to Americans. It can be misused to pry into private lives, ruin reputations, and cause emotional distress and threaten the safety of individuals. So, they're openly doing this because this is based on a report, from the ODNI. So this is no secret. But it seems like they're really just vacuuming up this data, and you got to wonder, what are they using it for? And I think, it's definitely concerning that they're doing this, and who knows what their plans are with it. All right, that is it for the news for today. Go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Connor Freeman that is just really something else. So a best-selling U.S. author cancels her own book amid anti-Russia PR campaign. So this is really something, and this is Elizabeth Gilbert. She is best known for her book Eat, Pray, Love, and she had another novel coming out that was set in Russia, that was set in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, or was about people that lived in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. And because of where it was set, there was this outrage, because of the war in Ukraine, and she's pulling the book, which is really, she's caving to this just ridiculous pressure. And this is just a summary of what the story is about. It follows a group of individuals who made a decision in the 1930s to remove themselves from society to resist the Soviet government and to try to defend nature against industrialization. For 44 years, they managed to live undetected, but in 1980, they are discovered by a Soviet geological team. So that's what the story is about. And then it's about them kind of existing in the modern world after living, in the forest for so long. So what does that have anything to do with Ukraine, or how is that they're accused of glorifying Russia? I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. But go check out Connor's article because he gives a good summary of it and some thoughts about it. It's just really ridiculous imagine being a novelist and writing a book and pulling it because of this nonsense. But this anti-Russia, propaganda is just so prevalent. And apparently it was getting a bunch of 1-star reviews on Amazon. And, it was one of those internet coordinated things. We also have one from Ted Snyder. Is Ukraine ready to negotiate? One from Joseph Solis Mullen over at the Libertarian Institute, examining the foreign policy establishment's British connection. One from John LaForge, de-escalation starts with ending all nuclear weapons sharing. And the spotlight is from Branko March-Teach over at Responsible Statecraft. Is the U.S. military more intent on ending Ukraine war than the U.S. diplomats? And I think it seems like they are. But that's everything for me for today. That was a lot of stuff that I went over. You could always support us at antiwar.com/donate. Like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or Odyssey, Rumble, wherever you watch the video. And if you listen to the audio version, you can leave reviews. You can follow us on Twitter, share our stuff around. That really helps. I appreciate all the support and all the feedback, all the comments. All that stuff is great. But I'll be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.